arts,
Ambitious.
for sure. The initial goal was to have like 1.5 million people living there by 2030.
Okay.
A $500 billion project.
Yeah, that's a lot of people.
It is. And that's actually where things get interesting. They've recently scaled back that target population to about 300,000.
Oh, wow. So that's a big change.
Huge change.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to dive into today.
I mean, like, what happened and what does it mean for the whole project? You know?
Exactly. What does it mean for this whole vision?
Because it is a fascinating project. You know, when you think about it, it's like the intersection of this like grand vision and then the reality of actually building something like that.
You know, it's funny you say that because I was thinking about it. It's like building with Legos.
Okay.
But each Lego brick is like this super complicated piece of technology that has to fit perfectly with everything else.
Right. It's not just like snapping them together.
Exactly. It's a whole different ball game.
Yeah. And speaking of complicated, I mean,
Right.
just look at the infrastructure of the line.
It's mind-blowing.
They've got this high-speed rail system running the entire length of the city.
The spine.
The spine. Yeah, 170 kilometers. Just imagine building that in the desert.
It's crazy.
Making sure it connects to everything else seamlessly. That's a feat of engineering right there.
It's a huge undertaking. And then on top of that, you've got their whole sustainability goal.
Right.
Zero carbon emissions, fully powered by renewable energy.
It's admirable.
It is. It's an amazing goal,
Yeah.
but it's a tough one. You know, you need the cutting-edge tech, the specialized materials, a highly skilled workforce.
Yeah. It's not easy.
Not at all, especially on that original timeline.
So that brings us to the why. Like, why the population shift
Right.
1.5 million by 2030.
Yeah.
That was incredibly ambitious.
I mean, given everything we've been talking about.
It had to be about feasibility at some point, right?
Yeah, I think so.
I think feasibility was a major factor, but I also think there's this other layer here too. It's demand.
Okay, so you're saying it's one thing to build it, but will people actually come?
Exactly. Are people really ready to embrace this completely new, hyper-technological lifestyle in the middle of the desert? I mean, that kind of adoption takes time.
And risk.
And risk.
Yeah.
It's a big ask. So maybe NEOM is using the smaller initial population as like a pilot program.
You're saying a pilot program for an entire city?
Kind of.
That's a really interesting way to look at it.
Yeah.
But even with the smaller population, the Lion's long-term vision is still huge.
Right. Absolutely.
They still want to, like, revolutionize how we live in cities.
Yeah. I think this shift might actually be a strategic move to strengthen that first phase of the project.
Okay. What do you mean by strengthen?
Well, think about it. With a smaller population, there's more room to focus on the quality of everything. They can really refine the tech,
Okay.
iron out the kinks and the logistics, and ultimately create this working model that is really impressive. And then they can replicate and scale up later.
Gotcha. So instead of rushing to hit that massive initial goal, they're taking their time to make sure everything's perfect.
Right, exactly. They're focusing on this first 300,000 people.
Yeah, and it probably makes sense from a financial perspective too, right?
For sure. Starting smaller allows them to manage those massive costs in a more prudent way.
It's a smart move.
Yeah.
So it's almost like they're building a proof of concept.
Yeah.
And once they've proven that it works, they could attract more people, more investment, and then expand.
They're playing the long game. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
I like that. And it shows that this adjustment to the population doesn't mean they've given up on the ambition.
No, not at all.
It just means they're adapting.
They're being strategic.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
So let's actually dive into some of the challenges they're facing.
Uh,
I mean, we're talking about building an entire city from scratch in the desert.
It's
A huge
what
undertaking.
are some of the biggest hurdles they've got to overcome?
Well, we touched on infrastructure earlier,
Yeah.
but it's a massive hurdle.
Right, the spine.
The spine is a huge part of it.
Yeah.
But the whole city is designed around all of these interconnected systems
Working together,
seamlessly, like a giant futuristic puzzle.
where every piece has to fit perfectly.
Precisely. And then you add in the fact that they're doing all of this in a really harsh environment.
Right, the desert.
Extreme temperatures,
Right.
limited water resources.
Yeah.
Just getting the basic utilities up and running is a challenge in itself.
It's crazy. And then you layer on the whole sustainability goal.
Exactly. Zero carbon emissions, renewable energy. We're not talking about just like slapping some solar panels on a roof here.
Right, it's about completely rethinking how a city functions.
Vertical farms, AI-powered services, robots handling maintenance. It's a different model of city living.
A whole different model.
And that brings us to another question, doesn't it?
What's that?
Will people actually want to live this way?
The human element.
Right? Like, can you get people to buy into this lifestyle that's so reliant on technology?
It's a great question. And it leads us to one of the most fascinating aspects of this whole project, the social implications.
Because it's a social experiment in a way.
It is.
It really is. So to understand that experiment, we need to look at the technology they're using.
Okay.
Like, how are they making this vision a reality?
Well, let's get into the nitty-gritty of the tech then.
Yeah, what are they doing that's truly cutting edge?
Well, for starters, the spine itself is a marvel.
Right?
Imagine traveling 170 kilometers in 20 minutes.
Wow.
It changes everything about urban transportation.
No more hour-long commutes.
Exactly. But what about energy and resource management?
Yeah, how are they going to make the line truly sustainable?
Yeah.
It's one thing to talk about vertical farms and robots, but how do they actually make it work?
That's where it gets really interesting. They're looking at a mix of solar, wind, and even geothermal.
Geothermal in the desert.
Yeah, it sounds a little counterintuitive, but they're really exploring all the options to hit that zero carbon goal.
Yeah,
And then there's the vertical farming you mentioned.
right, growing food in skyscrapers.
Exactly. It's all about maximizing land use and controlling the environment. And they're planning to use hydroponics and aeroponics to make it even more sustainable.
So, for those of us who aren't botanists, can you explain what those are?
Of course, hydroponics is basically growing plants in water instead of soil.
Okay.
The water has all the nutrients the plants need. And then aeroponics takes it a step further. The plants are suspended in the air and their roots get misted with a nutrient solution.
Wow. So no soil at all.
Nope.
Mm-hmm.
And both techniques use way less water, which is super important in the desert.
Makes sense. It all sounds very futuristic. But will it actually be enough to feed everyone?
That's the big question, right? Can they scale these techniques up enough to provide a consistent food source? It's a massive experiment.
Yeah, fingers crossed, I guess. So what about the AI side of things? How will that affect daily life for people living in the Lappin line?
Imagine a city where almost everything is connected and automated.
Okay.
Traffic, energy consumption, waste management, all optimized in real time by AI.
Sounds efficient.
Incredibly. It could personalize services in ways we haven't even thought of yet.
But what about privacy? If AI is managing everything, doesn't that mean constant surveillance?
That's a valid concern, and it's something that NEOM needs to address very carefully. If they want people to trust them, they need to be transparent about how they're using data and what protections are in place.
So there's huge potential, but also some big risks to consider.
Absolutely. It's a balancing act. The line is pushing boundaries, but it also makes us ask how much control we're willing to give up for convenience and efficiency.
That's a good question. So who are they trying to attract to live in this city in the desert? Who are these first 300,000 people going to be?
They're envisioning a global community of entrepreneurs, tech professionals, researchers, people who are drawn to innovation and sustainability.
Early adopters, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe not so much families looking for a quiet suburban life.
Right. More of a specific demographic.
People who are really comfortable with technology and adaptable to new environments. A bit adventurous, maybe?
Sounds a little exclusive.
It might seem that way now, but remember, NEOM wants to create a model for future cities. If they can prove that this model works, it could have a ripple effect on urban development all over the world.
So the line is like a prototype.
Yeah, kind of. A high-stakes experiment with the potential to change everything about how we live in cities.
It's a fascinating concept. But I have to admit, I'm still skeptical. We've seen so many of these grand projects fall short.
Skepticism is healthy, but I think there's room for optimism too. NEOM has a lot of financial backing. They have a clear vision, and they're putting together a world-class team.
So they're really going all in.
They are. But even if they solve all the technological and logistical challenges, there's still the human element.
Right. Can they actually create a thriving community in such a different kind of place?
That's the million-dollar question. We'll have to wait and see. But one thing's for sure, the line is a bold experiment, and everyone's watching to see what happens.
It really makes you realize that we have choices to make about the future of our cities.
We do, and the line is definitely pushing us to think outside the box.
It's challenging all of our assumptions about what a city can be, and whether it succeeds or not, it's starting a global conversation about urban design.
Exactly. And those conversations are so important. The problems facing cities aren't going away. We need new solutions. And the line at least gives us a glimpse of what might be possible. It really does make you think. How can we make cities sustainable but also livable and equitable for everyone?
So even with the scaled-back population, the line is still a huge deal. It's a testing ground for new technology, a potential model for cities, and a catalyst for rethinking how we live in them.
And it's still unfolding. The decisions that NEOM makes in the next few years will have a ripple effect everywhere.
We'll definitely be keeping an eye on it. But we want to hear from you now.
Hmm.
What do you think about the line? Is it a utopia, a dystopia, or something in between?
What stands out to you? What excites you? What worries you?
Because the future of our cities is something we all have a stake in. And the line reminds us that we have the power to shape that future.
So let's use this as a chance to think critically, challenge our assumptions, and imagine all the possibilities.
Who knows? Maybe someday we'll all be living in cities that look a lot like the line. Or maybe something even more incredible.
The future is full of surprises. That's what makes it so exciting.
We'll be back next week with another deep dive into a different topic that's shaping the future. Until then, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep imagining the possibilities. It's just wild to think about the scale of it all, you know?
It is.
Like, they're creating a whole new world in the desert.
Yeah.
And even though they scaled back the population, 300,000 people is still a lot,
Oh, yeah, definitely.
especially in that kind of environment.
Right.
Like, you can't just run to the store when you're in a city that's 170 kilometers long.
It's a whole different way of thinking about city living. And it's why the logistics are just as interesting as all the technology.
Right, all those everyday things we take for granted.
Exactly, like water and waste management. Those become huge challenges in a linear city in the desert.
So how are they going to handle that?
Well, they're looking at some pretty innovative solutions. For water, they're exploring closed-loop recycling systems.
Closed-loop systems. So what does that mean exactly?
Basically, they want to create a system where water is constantly being treated and reused within the city.
So minimizing the need for outside sources.
Exactly. It's all about efficiency.
So like the water from your shower could end up irrigating the vertical farms.
Exactly. And then the water from the farms gets cleaned and used for something else. It's a circular system.
That's pretty amazing. It's like a self-sustaining ecosystem.
It is.
But shifting gears a bit, what about the people building all this?
Good point.
Finding enough skilled workers for a project this specialized must be tough.
It is a challenge. They need engineers, architects, construction workers, sustainability experts, all with the right expertise to work in that unique environment.
Right, and everyone needs to be on the same page.
They're recruiting globally and doing tons of training to get everyone up to speed.
It's mind-boggling when you think about all the different pieces they have to manage.
It is. It's not just about the tech and the design. It's the people, too.
It really is. And speaking of people, we should talk about the cultural context here.
Yeah, good point.
Saudi Arabia has its own traditions and values. How does something like the line fit in with that?
It's an interesting question, because on the surface, it does seem like there might be a bit of tension there.
Right between the traditional and the hypermodern.
But NEOM is being presented as a showcase for Saudi Arabia's modernization efforts. They want to attract foreign investment, move away from oil dependence, and become a leader in technology and innovation.
So it's about more than just the city itself.
Right. It's about national image and transformation.
Yeah, it's a multi-layered project for sure. It's a fascinating case study, not just for urban planning and tech, but for how a country develops and changes.
I agree. It's like a microcosm of all the challenges and opportunities the world's facing right now.
It really is.
Yeah.
We're seeing rapid urbanization technology advancing so quickly, the need for sustainability globalization. It's all happening at once.
And the line is right at the intersection of all of that.
It is. And it reminds us that the future isn't set in stone.
Right.
We have choices to make about how we want to live, and those choices have real consequences.
Yeah, the choices we make individually as communities, as nations, they all matter.
They do. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the line, I think it's worth asking ourselves a big question.
Okay.
Is this the future we want?
A future driven by technology, hyper-efficiency, and ambitious design.
Or are there other things we should be focusing on?
It's a question everyone needs to consider. The line is one possible future. And whether it works or not, it forces us to think about how we want to live, how we want to work, how we want to interact with the world around us.
Yeah, and even if the answers are messy and complicated, it's so important to have those conversations.
It is. The future isn't preordained. We're creating it every day with the choices we make.
And projects like the line remind us that we actually have that power.
So as we finish up here, we want to leave you with this thought. Embrace your curiosity, stay informed, and get involved in these conversations.
Because the future depends on it.
It does.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
We hope you enjoyed it.
We'll be back next week with another fascinating topic. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep imagining the possibilities.